I never thought I'd be sitting here, alive and breathing, after my own flesh and blood looked me in the eye and left me to be torn apart by a predator. Have you ever felt the cold realization that the person you raised, the child you protected from every nightmare, has become the very monster you should have been afraid of? As the sounds of snapping branches grew closer and the heavy, rhythmic breathing of a grizzly bear filled the clearing, my son didn't reach out to grab my hand. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows of the trees, whispered, "Meet the grizzly bear, Dad," and vanished into the darkness, taking our only flashlight and the keys to the truck with him. I was standing there in total pitch-black silence, paralyzed by a betrayal so deep it hurt more than the literal claws I expected to feel in my back at any second. Was I wrong to survive the way I did? And would you ever be able to look at your child the same way again if they tried to end your life for a thrill? To understand how a father and son end up in the middle of the deep woods with one of them cheering for a wild animal to kill the other, I have to go back to the beginning. My son Leo was always a difficult child, but I chalked it up to a strong personality. His mother left when he was 5, and I spent the next 15 years trying to overcompensate for her absence. I gave him everything. I worked double shifts at the warehouse just so he could have the newest gaming consoles, the trendiest clothes, and eventually, a car that was much nicer than the beat-up sedan I drove. But as Leo grew older, that spark of rebellion didn't turn into independence. It turned into something much darker, a complete lack of empathy. He started small, hurting the neighbor's cat or laughing when a kid at school got seriously injured, but I was in denial. I told myself he was just edgy or misunderstood. By the time he was 20, he was still living at home, refusing to hold a job, and spending all his time on these dark corner of the internet forums where people glorified survival of the fittest and primal dominance. He started talking about the test. He told me that modern society had made men weak, and that we needed to return to the wild to see who was truly worthy of life. I thought he was just watching too many reality TV shows, so when he suggested a father-son camping trip to the remote wilderness of the Blackwood Range, I was actually happy. I thought, finally, we're going to bond. We're going to fish, sit by the fire, and maybe I can finally get through to him. I packed the gear, bought the best steaks for our first night, and drove us 6 hours away from civilization, deep into a territory where cell service is a myth and the nearest ranger station is a half-day's hike away. The first day was fine, though Leo was eerily quiet. He kept checking his backpack and looking at his watch. When we reached a clearing near a known bear corridor, he insisted we set up camp right there. I told him it was dangerous, that we were literally on a game trail, but he mocked me, calling me a coward who was afraid of nature. To prove I wasn't weak, I agreed. Night fell fast, and the woods became a wall of oppressive blackness. We were sitting by a small fire when we heard it. The heavy, unmistakable sound of a large animal moving through the brush. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for the bear spray, but Leo had already moved it. He stood up, looking not scared, but excited. He had this look in his eyes I'd never seen before, a total detachment from reality. He told me that he'd been planning this for months, that I was the old weight, holding him back from his true potential, and that if I couldn't survive nature, I didn't deserve to be his father. That's when he grabbed the keys, the light, and the pack, leaving me with nothing but the dying embers of a fire, and the sound of a 500-pound grizzly crashing through the pines toward us. He didn't run away in fear. He walked away slowly, mocking me with that "meet the grizzly" line as if he were introducing me to a business partner. The air felt thick, like I was breathing through a wet blanket, as the sounds of Leo's footsteps faded into the crunch of dry leaves. I could hear his muffled laughter, a sound so sharp and twisted it cut deeper than the cold wind. He wasn't just leaving me. He was savoring the moment. I realized then that every time I had hugged him, every time I had told him I was proud of him, he was likely calculating just how much of a burden I was. The silence he left behind was filled almost instantly by the snapping of a massive branch. The grizzly was close now, its scent, a foul mix of wet fur and old blood, wafting into the clearing. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling the heat from the dying fire on the back of my legs while my front was chilled by the night air. I realized that Leo hadn't just taken the light, he had taken my hope. He had spent years watching me provide for him, protect him, and love him. and he decided the ultimate reward for that sacrifice was to watch me be hunted. The psychological weight of that was almost enough to make me just sit down and wait for the end. I thought about the time he had broken his arm at 10 years old, and how I had stayed awake for 3 nights straight just to make sure he was comfortable. I thought about the college fund I had scraped together that he had eventually blown on high-end computer parts and strange equipment. All of it meant nothing to him. To him, I was just a biological obstacle. So, that is the situation I found myself in. Abandoned by my own son, weaponless in the dark, with a predator closing in. I had to make a choice in that split second that would change our lives forever. Before I tell you how I got out of that forest and what I found when I finally tracked Leo down, I want you to pause. Go down to the comments right now and tell me, if your own child did this to you, would you try to save them later? Or would you treat them as the enemy? What would you have done in my shoes? The bear emerged from the brush, a massive silhouette that blocked out the stars. I didn't scream. I remembered an old survival trick my own father taught me: don't run. If you run, you're prey. I backed away with agonizing slowness, keeping my eyes down but my body tall, moving toward the steep embankment of the river we had crossed earlier. I fell. I tumbled down 15 feet into the icy water. The shock of the cold nearly stopping my heart, but it saved me. The bear stayed at the top, huffing, and eventually moved on to the leftover steaks Leo had intentionally left scattered around our tent. I spent the night shivering in a rock crevice, fueled by a mixture of hypothermia and a rage so hot it felt like a physical weight in my chest. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a man who had seen the bottom of a human soul. Every minute in that crevice felt like an hour. I watched the stars crawl across the sky, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they might crack. I kept thinking about Leo's face as he walked away. It wasn't the face of a scared boy or even a confused one. It was the face of a predator. He had become what he worshipped. He had looked at his own father and seen nothing but meat. I realized that if I died here, he would go back to the world and tell everyone some heroic lie about how I died saving him. He would play the grieving son, inherit the small life insurance policy I had, and continue his descent into whatever darkness those forums had promised him. That thought was what kept me from drifting into the permanent sleep of the cold. I wouldn't let him have the satisfaction of a clean ending. I wouldn't let him write the story. At dawn, I started hiking. I knew the terrain better than Leo thought I did. He assumed I was a soft suburban dad, forgetting that I grew up in these woods before he was born. I took a shortcut through a ridge, cutting off miles of the winding trail he would have taken back to the truck. My boots were soaked, my skin was torn from the fall, and my joints screamed with every step, but I didn't stop. I walked through the gray light of the morning, seeing the world with a clarity I had never possessed. The beauty of the forest was gone. It was just a series of tactical positions and obstacles now. I found the trail again and saw his footprints, arrogant, heavy strides that showed he wasn't even worried. He was probably planning his victory speech. I reached the trailhead just as the sun was hitting its peak, and there he was. He was sitting on the tailgate of my truck, eating a bag of chips, looking completely bored. He didn't even look guilty. When he saw me limping out of the trees, covered in mud, blood, and dried river silt, his face didn't register relief. He looked disappointed. He actually sighed and said, "Oh, you're still here? I guess the bear wasn't hungry." He didn't realize that I had reached my breaking point. I didn't hit him. I didn't yell. I simply walked up, took the keys out of his hand before he could react, and locked him out of the truck. The look of shock on his face when he realized I wasn't going to let him in was the first honest emotion I'd seen from him in years. He started pounding on the window, calling me a sore loser, and claiming it was all a prank. A prank. He left me to die, and when I survived, he expected me to just drive him home and buy him dinner. I stared at him through the glass, seeing the stranger I had raised. I saw the entitlement, the lack of soul, and the sheer danger he posed to the world. I didn't say a word. I just started the engine and drove toward the ranger station, leaving him standing in the dust of the trailhead, miles from the nearest town. I drove to the nearest town and called the police, but not just for the abandonment. I told them everything: his test, his journals I found later filled with plans to purge the weak, and the fact that he had intentionally baited a bear to a campsite. When the officers arrived, they were skeptical at first, thinking it was just a family dispute gone wrong. But then I showed them the texts he'd sent to his friends on those forums while we were on the drive up. He had live-blogged the whole hunting of the old man. He had described his own father as obsolete hardware that needed to be uninstalled. The police's expressions shifted from confusion to horror. The aftermath was a whirlwind of court dates, psychiatric evaluations, and the slow, painful process of dismantling a life. Leo was arrested and eventually underwent a psychiatric evaluation that revealed deep-seated sociopathic tendencies, combined with a complete break from social norms. He's currently in a high-security residential treatment facility, and I haven't visited him once. He writes me letters sometimes, still using that same pseudo-intellectual survivalist jargon, telling me that I passed the test, and that he's proud of me for being strong enough to turn him in. He doesn't even understand that what he did was wrong. He only views it through the lens of his twisted game. People tell me he's your son, and family is everything, but those people haven't looked into the eyes of a person who wanted them to be eaten alive. They haven't felt the heart-stopping cold of a river, while their child laughed at their death. I sold the house, moved 2 states away, and changed my number. I've tied up the loose ends of my old life, but the silence of the woods still haunts my sleep. I spend my days now in a small coastal town, far away from the mountains. I don't go hiking anymore. I don't go camping. I stay where the lights are bright and the people are plenty. Sometimes I see a young man who looks like him in a crowd, and my heart stops for a second, wondering if he's escaped, if he's come to finish what he started. But then I remember the walls of the facility and the evidence I provided. I am safe, but I am hollow. The hardest lesson I learned is that blood doesn't make you family, loyalty and love do. You can pour your entire life into someone, and they can still choose to be the villain in your story. I survived the Grizzly, but surviving the betrayal of my son was the real test. If you think I did the right thing by turning him in and cutting him off, like this video to show your support. If you think a father should never give up on his son, no matter what, let me know why in the comments. I really want to understand that perspective. Subscribe for more stories where the people you trust the most turn out to be the ones you should fear. I'll see you all in the next story.